This pattern is the spring olive. It's a nymph pattern, a Baetis pattern. It's just a wonderful pattern. I've got a size 12 long. It's actually a dry fly hook here on my vise. You can go with a nymph hook if you want. I just don't want the extra bulk or the weight on this, so that's why I'm going to go with more of a dry fly hook. This is going to be olive pretty much from top to bottom, and I'm going to go ahead and start out with some goose biot or shoulder, and we're going to use that for our tail. So I'm going to go ahead and measure this out. I don't want it incredibly long, but I do want it on the top of the shank of the hook, so we're just going to go ahead and secure that in place. Let the thread kind of pull that over the top. Then I can, after I've taken a wrap or two, I can kind of look at my length. I may shorten that up a little bit, keeping that on top of the shank of the hook. And that's going to be just about where I want it. And I'm going to go ahead and tie in a piece of medium-sized gold wire, using medium-sized because I'm on a size 12 here, so it's a little bit larger hook than what I might typically tie with. Secure that down, and after a couple of thread wraps I can draw that material back so I don't have to cut it off. And then we're just going to work our way down the shank of the hook. I don't mind letting that gold wire kind of roll to the lens side of the hook, but I do want to keep those tails on the top. You can see it kind of rotated on me. I'm just going to spin that around a little bit, trying to keep my fingers out of the way as much as possible. We're just going to go ahead and travel down the shank of the hook to about where the hook bend would be. This is a barbless hook, so in that case we have to just kind of guesstimate. And I am being a little bit careful just here in the beginning because I really want this tail to be in the right spot. And then I'll just let my thread dangle and take a look and see, is this pretty close to where the barb of the hook would be. I may take another wrap back. It's very close right there. And I'm just going to go ahead and travel back up. And I'm just going to grab my scissors and cut off that excess, and then tidy up just a little bit up here towards the thorax area. I'm just going to come right on back towards the back end of the hook, and I'm going to turn to the exact same material again that we used for the tail, and we're going to use this for the abdomen on the fly. I'm going to tie it in by the tips because the back ends are really thick. The tips are much thinner, and I want to have the body pretty slender with a slight taper. So we're going to start by turning our thread counterclockwise so it's not fighting us like that just did. If you turn it counterclockwise, that thread will jump backwards instead of forwards. Go ahead and pull some of that excess off, and I'll just go ahead and tie this back in to where the abdomen ends and where the tails begin. Just like that. And I'm just going to work my way back forward, securing those tips down. Then I'll turn my thread counterclockwise, this time not so it jumps backwards necessarily, but trying to flatten it out a little bit. We're going to want a small taper here, and it's much thinner right at the moment near where the thorax begins, so I'm going to go ahead and take some thread wraps up here to start balancing that taper out. I'm going to just go ahead and secure this in my hackle pliers. Hold it straight up. I'm going to try to prevent this from twisting because I want it to lay pretty flat to keep a thin body here. I'll make sure I get that one wrap right around the tails. And then I'm just going to work my way right up that thread taper that we have in place. I'm going to go to about this point here, hold that straight up, going to release my thread from the bobbin cradle, move that out of my way, and I'm going to take a couple of wraps over the top of this to secure it in place. And then we'll go ahead and take a couple of wraps, pulling that material backwards, further securing it in place. Go ahead and release that from my hackle plier, grab my scissors, and we'll cut off this excess here. Next we'll grab our gold wire. I'm going to go ahead and start taking ribbing wraps. That's what this wire is going to be for, is to create that little bit of a ribbing. We want to keep these as evenly spaced as we can. So we'll also make this fly, aside from the ribbing, it'll make it a little bit more durable with that gold wire kind of locking those fibers in place. I'm going to take that right up here. We'll lock it off with a couple of thread wraps over the top. And then we'll just go ahead and use the helicopter, rotate that around while we're applying some pressure on it, and that will break right off. So now I'm going to take a little bit of scud back here, and it's in an olive color, so 1/8. Go ahead and turn our thread counterclockwise just to make sure our thread is going to wrap backwards for us, and we want this over the top. It's going to be our kind of wing case on this. Let's secure that down, and then I'll just kind of stretch it a little bit while keeping it centered over the top of the shank of the hook here. And I take that back to where I want my thorax to start. So we'll grab ourselves a little bit of olive rabbit dubbing here. It's going to form our thorax. Go ahead and dub that onto our thread here. We'll probably have to go back for a second helping here, just so that we have a beefy enough thorax here. I want to make sure that this starts back over the top of that scud back. Then I'm going to just take wraps forward. You want to make sure that your thorax is kind of sticking out a little bit. So you want it a little bit thicker in that area, which is why I'm going back for another bit of rabbit dubbing. I'm going to go ahead and dub that on. I'm trying to be conscious of the hook eye as well, so that I'm not crowding it. So I want it to get thinner as I move up there, and then I can just go ahead and kind of secure that dubbing down in place. I've got a few stragglers, so some of them can be trimmed, but I don't mind just kind of stroking some of those backwards right at this point, just to trap them a little bit further back. For the legs, I'm just going to turn to a partridge feather. It's already been prepared, cutting out the tip. It's dyed olive. We're going to try to get that to kind of straddle over the top of our fly. And pinch that down on either side. I'm going to take a fairly loose wrap here, coming over and not really pulling tight until I come back towards myself to try to minimize the amount of spinning that this might do, so it doesn't twist around the shank of the hook and get my legs right where I don't want them. You can see what this looks like. Our legs are a little bit long, so we're going to use this end and this kind of stem as a handle to just carefully pull these backwards till we get them to about the length that we want them. That's going to be about where I want it. I'm going to grab my scissors and we'll go ahead and trim out the excess here. With that, we'll take our olive scud back. I'm going to stretch it out a little bit, get that to lay right over the top, and that's going to further help keep those legs kind of split up. I'm going to secure that down, trying to keep it from folding over on itself. I'm going to take a couple of wraps over the top of it. Looks like we've captured some of our fibers from our partridge, but that's okay, we'll pluck those right out. And I'm going to pull that backwards, take a couple of wraps also right there over the thread rather than over the scud back. And then I'm going to go ahead and take my scissors, stretch this a little bit, that'll help that sink back down in. I'll cut part of it there, and then I'm going to turn my vise a little bit, work on cutting the rest of it out, turn my vise back around, couple more thread wraps just to kind of lock that in place. And from this point I can go ahead, we're going to grab our whip finisher, we'll straighten out those legs a little bit, and I'll go ahead and pluck out these couple of fibers that got trapped as I was moving forward. I've got plenty of legs on here, so I'm not concerned about that at all. So make sure you're conscious about keeping the eye of the hook clear here. So once I've got that done, we're just going to go ahead and take our thread cutter and we'll remove our thread. Now I can use my trusty tweezers. I'll just turn this a little bit. Usually you can just grab hold of these and pluck them right out. And finally, it doesn't hurt to turn this upside down. Since we used rabbit dubbing here, I'm just going to grab a little dubbing brush and just gently pull out a few of the fibers, just to give that a little bit bushier look. I don't want to go excessive there, I'll just end up having to trim it all away. And with that, there you have it. The spring olive nymph, great Baetis nymph pattern. Good for use in the spring, which it happens to be right now. I don't know when you're watching this video. But grab yourself a hook, throw it in your vise, and give this fly a shot.